This week, nonprofit groups that serve victims of sexual assault and domestic violence in Washington state are breathing a sigh of relief. This after funding was approved in the state budget to help supplement federal cuts. King 5's Connor Board is joining us now in the studio. And Connor, why was this funding so crucial to these groups?
Madison, back in December, groups that serve survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence found out they would be facing a 23% cut in federal funding starting in July. That's why they band together to call on the state to increase funding. With federal cuts planned for crime victim services funding, finding out there was no additional funding for these resources in the governor's legislative budget was concerning.
Scary. I was disappointed. I was frustrated.
Emily Stone with the Washington State Coalition Against Domestic Violence sees firsthand how nonprofits she works with are already struggling to keep up.
There were threats of, programs having to close their doors. And that was absolutely going to be the case without any additional funding.
Groups like hers had requested a total of $132 million in the state budget for the next 2 years and ended up with $50.8 million. More than 80% of that money is one-time funding to supplement federal cuts.
We're really grateful for that kind of short-term fix while we look at long-term solutions.
She says for the first time in 15 years, domestic violence services did see an increase in ongoing funding in the state budget, bringing their yearly funding from $6 million to $10 million.
I mean, you physically see survivors every single day in need, and so it's so hard to see that need, but then not see funding to actually support that.
Emily says sexual assault services did not see an increase in ongoing funding, but Mary Ellen Stone with the King County Sexual Assault Resource Center says they are thankful for the one-time funding. She says that funding does not expand services, it just allows them to keep up with the demand they're seeing.
Greatly increased mental health needs for young people. We're seeing, court backlogs. Resource line calls are very high. So the needs are out there.
The legislature did decide to fund a work group to figure out the best ways the state can ensure resources and funding are available to help survivors of gender-based violence in the future.
We owe victims of crime and victims of sexual assault in particular a lot better than that.
Better than now, with struggles of unstable funding and limited resources.
We're incredibly grateful that there's some additional funding in the budget. We know that there's still more work to do, but we're so grateful for the legislature stepping up and investing in these critical services.
Now, the work group formed to brainstorm ideas to support survivors of gender-based violence will make recommendations for the 2025 legislative session.